Welcome to this session. This is a session on advertising, and in this particular session, we are going to talk about the incidence of media or the impact of media in the field of advertising. Now, before we go into a discussion about the media itself, let us take a look at what is communication. Because advertising, after all, is a form of communication that uses medium or media. But then let's try and understand what are the issues involved in a communication process, and from there itself we can understand the role of the media with respect to advertising. Now, can any one of you tell me what are the issues involved in a communication?
So there has to be a message, there has to be a sender, a receiver, and of course a
Right.
medium to transmit this message from the sender to the receiver.
Right, quite rightly so. So there are two parties to it at least. There is a sender of the communication or the message as he's calling it. In fact, it is called a message in the media parlance, and there is a receiver of the message. Now, this message could well be an advertising message, and that's the reason we are discussing media and advertising together. So there is a sender, there's a receiver, there's a message, and that message will be sent or transmitted by the sender to the receiver by using a communication channel that is in fact the medium, and media is a plural of medium. So fine. So there is. So you can understand from this what is the role of media in the field of communication and in advertising in particular. Okay. Now, apart from this, there are certain other issues involved in a communication process. Can any one of you tell us what are the issues involved? How is the message transmitted to the receiver by the sender? Can the message be sent in any format, in any manner that the sender wants to? Can he?
No, sir. First, the message has to be encoded.
That's right. So the message has to be encoded in a manner that is compatible with the medium. The media has to be able to read and understand that message and be able to transmit that message. Otherwise, if there's an incompatibility between the message and the medium, then it's not going to work. So you have to look into the compatibility aspect of the message and the medium. That's one. And when the message has been encoded by the sender into the medium and has been transmitted, what happens at the other end is this, that the receiver has to decode
the
that
message.
Right. So there is a question of encoding the message by the sender and decoding
the
it
message
by the receiver. Okay. So the receiver, when he receives it, has to be in a form that is understandable by the receiver, and it cannot be in any other form that the receiver does not understand. So we have built into the system, there are the activities of encoding and decoding also. Okay. And is there any other element in the communication process?
So there is the feedback process.
Yes.
There is many a time a feedback. The sender is sending a communication to the receiver. Many a time the receiver might give a feedback, and that would complete the communication channel. Without a feedback, it would be an incomplete communication or a one-way communication. But if you have both the forward communication and the feedback coming through, then you have got a complete loop of communication.
Two-way communication.
It becomes a two-way communication. Fine. And is there anything else in it?
So there is an element of noise.
That's right. Absolutely. There's
barrier.
something called a noise. What is noise? Arnav, can you tell us what is noise?
So noise is any kind of obstacles or hindrances that comes in the way of communication through advertising.
Absolutely. So there is no reason to believe that the sender would be able to communicate the message as and when he would like to communicate it to the receiver. There would be other intervening variables, other constraining factors which might distort the message in one way or another, which could create a hindrance for the message being transmitted. All these can be collectively termed as noise. And how is noise relevant to our discussion? I'll just give you a small example. Let's say with my communication about a brand, I might put your brand at a disadvantage in some way or the other. I might make your brand look different from the brand that you want to show to your receiver. So all these are distorting factors, distorting influences, which can be termed as noise. Apart from the fact that there can be technical problems also. Like, let's say when you're using a medium like telephone while communicating with a receiver, any disturbance on that line of telephone is going to be termed as noise. Let's say using television to transmit a message, any technical problem with the sight or the sound of the television is really a noise. So these things are also part of noise, but then noise does not necessarily mean that it's a technical problem. Noise can also come from areas which are non-technical, which are intended disruptions by other parties. Okay.
So like language barrier.
Language could well be a barrier, and that could create some sort of a noise in the
Then
communication.
physical distance and the
Right.
semantic barrier.
Semantic barrier.
Fine, so there could be lots of barriers in the process of communication which we are collectively terming as noise. Now, with this understanding of communication, let's now go deeper into our understanding of the media. Now, what do we understand by a medium? Can anyone say what is a medium?
So it is basically a channel of communicating the message.
Well, it's a channel for communicating a message.
Yeah.
Now, when we talk about a channel of communication, what kind of channels can we think of?
Print.
Print media.
So we can talk about
Electronic.
different forms of channels, different forms of media. Can we name some of the usual media that we understand?
So newspaper,
Magazines.
magazines.
Radio, television.
Newspapers and magazines. So, taking these together, we could term them perhaps as print media.
Print
Okay.
media.
So, one of the important forms of media transmissions or media communications depend on print media. Okay, and newspapers and magazines form predominantly, what is termed as print media. What other forms of medium we are aware of?
Electronic media.
Electronic media.
Electronic media.
internet.
Like, for example,
Television, radio.
television and radio are electronic media. Okay, and what other forms of media?
Direct mails, internet.
Direct mails, direct marketing messages, the internet.
Internet.
The telephone could also be termed as a medium.
Medium.
Okay. So, any other
transit
forms of media?
Transit media like packaging.
Now, what is a transit medium? What is a transit medium?
So that could fill in the gap. Generally, newspapers, magazines, these are the conventional types.
Right.
So transit media would be a supportive media to the conventional
Correct.
media.
So, these are supporting media. Let's say, for example, a public transport vehicle, and on the body of that public transport vehicle, some particular advertising message has been printed and displayed. Now, this is a medium which is also using itself, for communicating purposes, and there's some sponsor behind it, and there are some receivers who are receiving it, and it is in transit. It is moving from one place to another. So, it's really a transiting medium. Is it
So-
not so?
So like Vodafone does wearing t-shirts and
T-shirts.
caps
Right.
and
There are many, like for example, we use personal media. Like somebody wears a T-shirt and there's a message on that on behalf of a particular brand. That is also a form of communication. That
Transit
is also
media.
a transit kind of medium,
Yes.
using a person who will be moving around from one place to another, and there will be lots of other people who will see him
See
wear
him.
that particular T-shirt and get that message. So they are all unconventional but frequently used forms of media as supporting media, trying to reach out to a larger audience apart from the mass media that are employed. And there are many other different kinds of innovative media people are thinking about. So we'll get into all those discussions, but then first of all, let's focus attention on the usual conventional media that form the backbone of communication, usually between a set of marketers and a set of
consumers.
potential consumers or actual consumers. Okay, so let's try and understand what are the advantages and disadvantages of the different forms of media that we have just about mentioned. And let's start with the print medium. We have said before that the print medium normally comprises the newspapers
Newspapers.
and
And
the
magazines.
magazines. Okay, so let's take one after the other. Look at newspapers. What do newspapers as a form of medium do? What are their advantages? What are their strengths? And what are their possible weaknesses that we need to be aware of? Fine. Can we start with you, Shiny? Can you tell us what are some of the advantages of the print medium, especially the newspapers?
So firstly, it has a high one-time reach.
Great. Now, can you explain that? What is a high one-time reach?
So basically, we can reach a lot more people, not only
Yes.
in the urban areas, even rural areas with their vernacular papers. Even people who do not know English might read the vernacular languages,
Absolutely.
and they can be aware of what's going on in the world.
Absolutely. It's a mass medium. It reaches out to a large cross section of the population. In the urban areas, the penetration of newspapers is very high. Almost every household will take at least one newspaper, would subscribe to at least one newspaper in a day. And many households subscribe to more than one newspaper in a day. In the suburban areas, it could be a little lesser. And in the rural areas, it could be even lesser. Because it depends on the level of literacy also. You need to be literate to be taking advantage of a medium like the newspaper. From the point of view of the advertiser or the marketer, by inserting one advertisement for his brand or of product or service, he can immediately reach out to a very large audience in one shot. So that's a major advantage of newspaper. Fine. Any other advantage you could think of?
Yes, sir. It also develops reader habit, loyalty, involvement of the
Great.
reader.
Now that's something very unique to newspapers. So it creates a habit, it builds up what she's termed as loyalty, absolutely, and it brings in a lot of involvement. That other thing she mentioned, because it is a medium that requires you to spend cognitive effort. You have to be intellectually involved in a medium like a newspaper.
Newspaper.
It's not a casual, passive medium. Okay, it's an involved medium. You have to read and understand. That is any day more difficult than watching something on, let's say, television or listening to
Or
something on radio. So it is an involved medium. It is a high involvement medium. And if you're talking about a product that also tries to build up loyalty, encourages a habit, and brings an involvement, perhaps we're talking about a newspaper as a likely medium for communicating that kind of a message. Okay? Fine. Any other advantage you can think
So
of?
it is inexpensive form of medium because
Quite
it's
true.
cheap,
Quite true. It's very
economical.
inexpensive. The production cost for a newspaper is certainly far less compared to the other electronic forms of media.
Right, yeah.
When you talk about per unit of production. Okay.
So very economical.
It's very economical. It uses very ordinary quantity of paper, the newsprint, and it is not so expensive. And therefore, the production cost per unit of the newspaper is not very
low.
high. Okay, it's quite low, and that
Very
is a
low.
positive advantage from the point of view of the
Users.
media
The
owner
reader.
and the user who will be
User.
using that medium for transmitting the message. Okay, fine. Any other thing you can think
So
of?
it is also
Strength?
tangible and we can keep it.
That's a big advantage. It's a tangible thing. Okay, a newspaper comes to your home. That newspaper you read, you can read it at different times of the day. You can keep that newspaper from the morning to the evening. Different people might read it at different times of the day in the same household. It can even be passed on to people
Yeah.
who come to visit your home, or you could even take it away with you if you're going somewhere. It's a tangible thing. The message remains with you. It does not go away. It's not a fleeting message. You can, revisit that message a number of times within the same day itself. Okay, so that's a very major advantage for a newspaper. And any other advantage you can think of?
So it has a short lead time also. One can change the layout of the newspaper.
Again, if you think of it from the perspective of the media owner or the media user, people can insert an advertisement and make changes in the layout of the advertisement even pretty late in the day. Even, let's say, just a few hours, maybe 24 or 48 hours, depending on the newspaper, you could bring about certain changes in the layout of that newspaper or in that ad. Okay, and that is a flexibility which many of the other media forms may not afford. Fine. So we have had a look at the different points of advantages as far as newspaper as a medium is concerned. Let's turn our attention to what are some of the likely weaknesses we can think of for this medium, and we need to be aware of that. Shani, can you help us further on this? Like, what are the likely areas we need to be aware of as weaknesses for a medium?
So illiterate people, for them, it's not a very good form of
Correct.
medium.
So perhaps we are saying that it is not a mass medium in the sense that in a country like ours, where the rate of literacy is not as high as we would like it to be, there are certain cross sections of society which will not be able to take advantage of this medium. Although it's a very cheap medium, affordable medium, but then it will not be compatible for someone who is not a lettered person. Okay, but then that does not mean that he is illegible or he is ineligible to receive a communication in terms of the message that we want to transmit. So there is this problem that one has to be literate enough to be able to take advantage of newspaper as a medium. Okay, any other?
So there's decreasing readership nowadays because
This is an alarming trend
Yeah.
for all newspaper producers and people who are using newspaper as a medium, that over the years all over the world this is a trend that there's a decreasing readership. Okay, people who used to read newspapers are progressively
Switching
and
over to
increasingly
other
shifting
Other
over to
mediums.
other forms
Other
of media,
forms.
internet being one of them.
Yes.
And in fact, let me tell you this, that teenagers are not a group that are used to handling newspapers. So that is one positive drawback, and one has to be aware of this drawback. Any other thing you can think of which is not a strength for a newspaper, it's a weakness?
So there are too many advertisers wanting to advertise their product in the newspapers.
So-
There's a lot
So
of
there's a clutter.
Yeah.
Right, clutter is a technical term. So there's a lot of clutter in a newspaper because it's a cheap medium. The cost of advertising in a newspaper is not as high as it would be in the electronic media,
Like in case of television.
like in the case of television. So many people, many advertisers, many sponsors would flock to newspapers because they want to take advantage of cost. But the fact is, a newspaper can accommodate only a few advertisers on a day. So there is always this competition for space, and people may not find the right spot that they are looking for. They may not find the right location in the newspaper that they want for their product to be advertised because of this clutter. That's there, but then that clutter is there across all kinds of media. Now that there are so many people trying to use media for communication purposes, be it marketing or non-marketing, there is the incidence of clutter for every possible medium, in newspapers included. Okay, and any other thing?
So the media waste is also very high because
What do you mean by this media waste? Can you tell us?
so everybody may not require the newspaper as a medium of communication. They might
Correct.
switch to some other mediums like the radio or television could have more aesthetic appeal.
No, I tend to disagree with you. What you are saying, media waste is somewhat different from that. It is in the sense that it reaches out to a large cross section of people, but then many of those people may not be interested in the ad message that you are trying to put into it. So that amount of advertising effort which is going into publishing it in a newspaper is going waste. We are spending money as marketers or sponsors, we are spending money trying to bring out our ads in the newspapers, but then many of the people we are reaching out to are not the eligible or the target audience that we want to reach out to. We are reaching out far more many people than we intend to do. Okay, so that amount of marketing effort is really going waste. That is possibly what was that there at the back of your mind when you said media waste. Okay, one other weakness I would say is the quality of reproduction.
Yes.
It's low.
So
given-
very poor reproduction.
Very poor reproduction.
The paper
because
that
we
they
use newsprint, which is not a very high quality paper, and when you try to use ink on that, it would normally get blotted and spread. The ink would spread in a manner that would not make it look very aesthetic. So the aesthetic appeal of an
Not
advertisement
very
in a newspaper is hardly comparable to that, let's say, on what you see an image on television, or let's say even in a costly magazine. The quality of reproduction is far better, far superior. But then it balances off because it's not so costly and the quality is also not as good. Okay. So these are some of the issues that you need to keep in mind if you are going to use newspaper as a medium for communicating your advertising messages. Now, apart from newspapers, the other most important form of print medium are the magazines. Fine, then maybe can we talk to Ornob about magazines? Ornob, can you take us through some of the strengths of magazines as a form of medium?
So the first strength is that there is an audience selectivity.
Correct, can you elaborate on that?
There are special interest magazine. If someone is interested in business, that person will go for business world.
That's right.
If someone is interested in sports, that person will go for sports magazine.
Okay.
If someone is interested in lifestyle and entertainment,
Right.
they'll go for lifestyle magazine.
Absolutely.
So there is an audience selectivity in
Absolutely.
magazines.
So I hope that's very clear. You
Yes.
explained it very well. So because it allows you to segment the market in a manner which is not possible with a newspaper. Newspapers have got a general appeal, so it goes to all kinds of people, all kinds of markets. But then magazines are sought by people depending on their areas of interest. It is not a question of a habit that you have to be aware of news, what's going on. It is rather a question of your interest area, and you will subscribe to special purpose magazines for that. So it is something that you exercise your choice in. You are more selective about subscribing to a particular magazine or not subscribing to a particular magazine. So at one go, the advertiser or the sponsor can reach out to a target profile that matches with his required target profile. Okay, suppose I am trying to advertise for sports equipment. So I would know where are the sports interested people going and what are the kinds of magazines they are likely to read up. So I would try to seek out those magazines and try to put my advertisement insertions in those kinds of magazines only. So I reach out to my target audience the way I want. And as a result of this, I'm going to cut down on the wastage. What we were talking about some time back, with the help of the newspaper, we are unable to cut down on the wastage to a very large extent. But then with the magazine, we are able to cut down the wastage in our marketing effort to a very large extent because we are reaching out to a select group of people that we want to reach out to. Fine, point absolutely well taken. Any other point comes to your mind?
So there is an expertise involvement. In sports magazine, some experts from the sports can give their editorials.
Correct.
And so the sports people can get benefited from it. And again in business magazine, some business guru or industrialist or any entrepreneur can give their editorial.
Absolutely.
So the new upcoming business person can get more knowledge about it.
Absolutely. So
there is a better
Yeah.
knowledge from the experts are communicated through that through the
Quite so.
magazines.
So there is obviously the question of specialization involved here. Not as much as in the case of newspapers, but here a newspaper is more generalistic in orientation. It tries to cover different aspects of human activity. But then special purpose magazine goes into specific areas of interest and therefore does a more specialized job of that, which is what brings into focus areas of interest in terms of products and brands and services which are relevant to that field of activity. Okay, and therefore you are creating a mood where the advertisement would look very familiar given the circumstances. Okay, and a newspaper carrying an ad for something may not, the ad might look completely out of place there, but then in a magazine, a particular ad which is relevant to the topic being discussed, would look very relevant in that particular section of the magazine. So this is what builds up the the ambience of the reading, and the reader is more hooked on to the messages, more hooked on to the advertising communication that can be carried on using magazines as a medium. Excellent. What else?
So then there is a high credibility.
High
Because
credibility, yeah.
magazines consist of both news as well as editorials.
That's right.
So
And caters to the interest of the target audience in a way
audience.
that the other media does
Media
not.
does
Okay.
not.
So it has got high credibility. People believe what they read in magazines more than perhaps what they hear on radio or hear on television.
See on television.
Okay, so credibility levels are high, and there are experts, as he was referring to. There are expert opinions brought in, editorials brought in. So and there is news in it as well. And news is always more credible than advertisements, because we are dealing in news after all, and editorials and special activities in which I have an interest. So I find the messages more credible, which are found in those magazines, rather than if I were to find them in a newspaper. So in terms of credibility, an ad insertion in a newspaper would win against a ad insertion in a newspaper. Fine. Any other advantage?
Sir, magazines have very longer life.
Correct. That is
because-
quite understandable. A magazine would normally be there for a month, maybe it could be there for a week or a fortnight or a month. Normally that's the
Can be
frequency
preserved.
of.
Can be preserved for later references
Right.
whenever we
Correct.
need.
Absolutely, a magazine is not something that, unlike the newspaper, which whose life is really 24 hours, and beyond that the newspaper is of no use
No
mostly.
use.
A magazine has got a much longer life.
Yes.
You can stock it,
We-
store it, and read it and revisit it maybe number of times over the week or even over the month. So the opportunity of having to see that ad again and again is there for the interested audience. So that's a major advantage. A long life of the advertisement is available. Fine.
Sir, and of course, like unlike newspaper, there is a high quality of production. Like the
True.
design,
The
the
aesthetic
appeal,
appeal
the
rather.
aesthetic appeal
True.
is very
Yeah.
more in magazines rather than in newspaper.
Absolutely. So when you are comparing it with the newspaper, again you find that the quality of the reproduction is far superior. Quality of the printing, quality of the layout, the visuals, and the color that would come out on the magazine pages would be far more appealing, more aesthetic, and a lot more variation would be possible with a magazine than it would be possible by using a newspaper. So that's a major advantage again. Now, Arnav, can you tell us about some of the weak areas of where are the magazines weak?
So
What's wrong with them?
So long lead time.
Okay, could you explain that a little more?
So long lead time means the preparation time for a magazine is much longer.
Okay.
We cannot make sudden changes. We cannot make changes the day before the magazine goes for printing.
Right. If you're
So-
comparing that with the newspaper, the
Newspaper.
lead time is much longer. So the advertiser or the sponsor will have to be prepared in advance, and he should know that this is the final layout, and I cannot make any further changes to this layout, because the magazine publisher would not let me make those changes now. And therefore I have got to do a lot of homework before I finalize, and once I finalize I cannot make any changes. So in terms of flexibility, I do not enjoy as much as I enjoy a flexibility with the newspaper. Or any other point?
It's a low mass appeal since it is specialized.
Okay.
So it has got less mass appeal.
Right, it has got a
Unlike-
lesser mass appeal. It's not a mass medium in the sense a newspaper is, although it would qualify as a mass medium, because it after all does reach out to a lot of people who are interested in that field. But then it is specialized, therefore it does not cater to an audience as large as a newspaper would. That in a way is good as well as it is a weakness, because it does not reach out, it does not have a universalized appeal. So if you are using it in order to promote a message that has got to be universal in acceptance, then a magazine perhaps may not be the right platform to choose. Any other point before we close down?
It's less economical than newspaper. It's costly in
Correct.
production.
It's costlier. So from the point of view of the producer or the sponsor or the advertiser, the costs involved are far more. So in order to insert an ad, you have to shell out a lot more money than in the case of a newspaper. Okay, that's another point. And yes, one more point before we really close down on this episode.
Sir, like newspaper, we get it every day, but
Yeah.
magazines, the frequency of magazine is less. We can get it weekly or fortnight or monthly, or
Monthly,
rather
yeah.
in 3 months, like Forbes and
Right. So the advertiser will really have
etc.
to wait. If he wants to take advantage of the magazine platform to advertise, he cannot do it as frequently as he can do with the newspaper. He might have to wait for at least a week or a fortnight or a month, depending on the frequency or the periodicity of the magazine. So that is a factor that the advertiser will have to reckon with, and therefore he will have to be satisfied with maybe weekly exposures or monthly exposures and not more frequent than that, what is possible with a newspaper. So fine, these are some of the major issues involved with the magazine as a print medium, and I think we have focused a lot of attention on what are the merits and demerits, strengths and weaknesses of the print media in general. And I think we are running out of time. We have to close on this discussion, and when we come back for another episode, we talk about the merits and demerits of the other media, like the electronic media. Okay. Now, are we clear about what we have discussed in today's episode?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Do you have any more questions on this?
No, sir.
Fine. Thank you very much.